Well, I think that there's been a lot of debate about how you deal with poverty reduction and what's the approach. And we've seen approaches in a number of jurisdictions that have been pretty ad hoc. And some of it said we need to throw more money at it, whether it's increases in welfare rates, we need to do housing, there's a bunch of one-offs. But we haven't seen a whole lot of attention that said what we really need is a strategy and a plan that's accountable. And some jurisdictions, and we now have 6, 7 jurisdictions in the country, provinces, that have actually adopted either legislated or regulated programs through regulation. And it seems to be an approach that makes sense. It's an approach that says the government will put in place a plan with some targets and some timelines that's accountable, that's somewhat transparent, and that engages people in a way in determining what might be the measures that don't just deal with the short term or the band-aids around poverty, but look at ways that we might actually break the cycle of poverty more long term. And that's got to be where we go. And that's I brought in a private member's bill into the legislature that was meant to do exactly that. And it talked about definitions of poverty, it talked about a process, it talked about objectives. It didn't say we will do X, Y, and Z or we will achieve this. But it said that over a year period, we would in fact set those things in place, working with stakeholders, with people who are on assistance, within a range of experts, and determine how to move forward. And then we would do that in a way that was accountable and reported out on an annual basis to say we are going to achieve these levels of reductions in poverty over this period of time, and there's going to be benchmarks along the way that allow us to see how we're doing.
One of the things the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives has identified is various measures by which the government claws back money that might be going to poor people, whether it's family maintenance support payments. In other jurisdictions, there are earnings exemptions. I'm wondering if you've looked at that level of detail and are of a view that specific changes need to be made.
We have looked at that, and exemptions is one of the areas where we think that there's some real opportunity to move forward. The reality is, if you look to move people on income assistance up to the LICO measure, low income cutoff measure, which is one of the measures that's used to determine poverty, it would be extremely expensive, quite frankly, to just move everybody on assistance to that level. You'd also create a bit of a conflict currently, because you would then have people at a level that would be greater than minimum wage, even after we get to $10.25 an hour. And you start to create a dynamic problem there where people who are working are making less money than people who are on assistance. And I can imagine and I can hear the reaction to that now. So one of the things you do is you determine that you're going to have to deal with in some way with questions of income assistance and income assistance rates. But one of the other things you can do is create more opportunities. And this just seems like it makes sense. Opportunities for people to work themselves, particularly employables. We have about 37,000, 38,000 people on welfare today who fall into the employable class. Give them an opportunity to work themselves off of welfare. And that means putting earning exemptions in place. We have none for that class of people on assistance. And we're very supportive of that and saying, let's open that up. Let's give people the chance to earn money. Let's give people the chance to find other resources on their own and to transition themselves off without losing it $1 for $1. Because if you're losing it $1 for $1, why do you do it?
Have you thought about what percentage the earnings exemption could be? Could they make 20% of what they're making as an employable social assistance recipient without being penalized, 25%, 30%, or have you got a range that you're thinking of?
Well, at this point, I think what we're looking at is saying, okay, we're probably looking at a flat number at the outset. We'll want to do some things.
Do you have a ballpark figure for that?
Well, not necessarily a specific one, but I think you need to look at something that's probably in the range of a couple $100 a month. To allow that to start. And then you really have to have a conversation about how you do that. You also need to have a conversation about things like the series of benefits that people can receive on assistance or on medical benefits, those kind of benefits. Is there a place where you maintain those benefits for a period of time as somebody transitions off of assistance, and you allow them a period of time where they continue to maintain those benefits while they move to stabilize themselves in the workforce as they go back. Is that a positive thing? So you have to look at what are the deterrents to people getting off of welfare? What are the challenges that people may not be able to overcome on their own? And then how do you deal with that, as well as providing training supports, other kinds of assistance that help people to break that cycle. And exemptions is part of that, particularly, and for example, persons with disabilities. It's the one category that does have an exemption, $500 a month earned exemption. We should probably have a discussion about whether persons with disabilities should be seen to being on assistance at all, or should it be viewed as some form of a pension, which some people might say, you know, that's a bit of semantics or whatever, but I think it is a different situation. And do you allow people to earn a little bit more? Also, persons with disabilities, sometimes they can go and work a certain amount, but not work full-time or permanently, because their disability doesn't allow for that. Yet they have a fear to go and work at all because it potentially could jeopardize their classification as PWD, a person with disability. And that's very tough to get in the first place, and you certainly don't want to lose it. So there's a discouragement for them to go and see whether they can maximize their own potential. So let's see what we can do to encourage people to go and do more. And make their lives as full as they can. We don't do that very well, and our system doesn't encourage that. It discourages it, in fact, and we need to look at that.
One of the issues for working poor is the cost of transportation. If they buy a bus pass, transit pass, they can actually get a tax credit from the federal government. But many people can't afford a transit pass because they don't have that much money at the time, so they end up doing these individual transit fares, and then they can't claim any tax credit. I'm wondering if you've applied your mind to how to make transportation more affordable for low-income people.
Well, you know, and you talk about people, the working poor. We have about 500,000 people in British Columbia who are poor. Of that, probably more than half of those people are working poor. They're not on assistance, they're not on a pension. They're working, but they don't make enough money to get themselves out of that classification of poor. And we need to figure out how to support that group as well. Some of that will come, the minimum wage increases that are coming in, which will take the minimum wage ultimately to about $10.25 an hour. That still falls short. To reach the LICO level, you probably have to get up just over $11 an hour to actually kind of get to that level.
Nicholas Simons was saying $12 an hour in the campaign, yeah.
Yeah, and we think the number is just over $11 based on what we've seen. So you'd have to do that. But you're right, to the extent that we need to figure out how we ensure people meet their basics. Transportation, housing, which is a huge challenge. We need to figure out how to support people in housing. The government currently uses the rent subsidy and rent supplement program, but it's very modest. 9,000 families in the province use it, a very small number.
This is what I was going to ask you too, was the Campbell government introduced rent supplements on a reasonable scale, maybe not sufficient for to meet the need as you see it. They've also sharply reduced income tax for low-income people. If you were to give the Campbell government a letter grade for how it's dealt with poverty issues, what would it be?
Oh, it would be a failing grade. I think the reality is we've had the highest poverty rates in the country for the better part of a decade. That's just reality. The conference board said 17% of people in Vancouver are living in poverty today. We simply haven't met their need. Part of the reason for that is because we haven't had any kind of comprehensive look at that. For people on income assistance, we essentially have not had an increase in a decade. You'll know the government in 2002 cut the rates and then restored that cut in 2007, but there was no increase. So we've had no increase in the better part of a decade. For the working poor, it's only in the last short number of months that we've seen the first increase in over a decade in the minimum wage. So this is not a government that's been very supportive. They stopped building family housing purpose-built social housing for families. Families is one of the key areas. So they really haven't done very much. And cutting taxes on people who don't have any money, well, that doesn't really fix their problem.
One of the issues that the Campbell government did was make single mothers, single parents, fathers too, deem them employable when their children turned 3.
Right.
It used to be 7. And that creates a challenge because sometimes there isn't childcare, or childcare is very expensive. Would an NDP government increase that employable category back to the old standard of when the child was 7?
Well, it's something we have to look at, and you have to look at it for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that you have to look at how you supply childcare as well. And we know childcare is a very expensive proposition. We need to supply more childcare. We need to figure out how to do that, but it's not a cheap thing to do. I think the childcare advocates, who have a very comprehensive plan that they've been advancing, $2 billion a year to build out that program. So it's a bit of a challenge financially, but we need to work on that. And clearly, in terms of things like eligibility, there are big issues around eligibility. That's an issue in terms of the age, at what age parents are expected to go back to work. There's issues about how people are eligible in terms of how often and how long they can stay on assistance. So there's a variety of challenges around eligibility questions. And some would argue, even though we have the highest number of people on social assistance today than I think any time since 2002, we still probably have restricted a whole number of people who would be applicants or on assistance today because of eligibility requirements.
Well, one of the things the government did too, the Campbell government, was shut down offices, even on tenancy issues. You have to go all the way out to Burnaby. But even for social assistance, they put up signs in the offices that some perceived to be almost intimidation not to sign up for social assistance. And I'm wondering what an NDP government could do to create perhaps a more welcoming climate for poor people.
Well, one of the things the government did, and this was a financial matter, the government moved away from caseloads. It used to be that you had social workers, you had financial aids, and they had caseloads. They had people who were assigned to them, and they built relationships with those people. And the reality is, if you're going to meet people's needs, you're much better off if you have a relationship with them. They get to know you, you know them, you understand their particular challenges, and you can work around that to try to make their situation a better situation, and hopefully to get them to independence at some point, if that's viable. That's all gone now. Now you phone up if you're on welfare, you phone up the office and you get the first person who answers the phone, and sometimes on a particular issue that you may be involved in, you could call back 3 days in a row and talk to 3 different people about that same issue. And to some degree, you're almost beginning again every time you do that. Now, the government will say that having workers, having caseloads is a more expensive proposition in terms of staffing resources required, but I'm not so sure that that's more expensive than not being able to deal with people's issues. So you need to be able to build those relationships in order to, I think, succeed in helping people to achieve their goals. And you don't do that by not having them be able to build relationships with people who work for the government.